Thank you, everybody, for coming to today's talk, Secret Courts in Latin America, Social Media Platforms, and Judicial Regulation Attempts. We're privileged to be joined for this talk by Dr. Tassiana Moura de Oliveira. She is a lecturer here in the Department of Latin American and Caribbean Studies at UAlbany. Her research ranges from Latin American courts, political institutions, judicial behavior, and social rights. Before I pass it over, just like usual ground rules. So Dr. Moura de Oliveira, she's going to speak for about more or less half of the time. Then we're going to kind of transition into Q&A. So as always, if you have any questions over the course of today's talk, we encourage you to put them in the chat. I'll monitor the chat so I can read the questions. Also, if you want, you can use the hand raise function. I can call on you if you're brave enough to talk. With that being said, I will pass it over to Dr. Moura de Oliveira.
Hi, thank you so much, Connor, for the introduction. I just want to make uh, just correct you in something that I'm a visiting assistant professor at the Department of Political Science since August last year, but I used to be a lecturer in the Department of Latin American Studies here at UAlbany as well. So I'd like to once again thank for the opportunity, thank for the Rockefeller College for organizing this event. And I think it's really interesting. It's a great platform to share some ideas with the community. So first, I have to explain that I do not have the time to explain who is who in this story, that I aim to share the facts on why or how Latin American courts are trying to regulate the social media platforms. But there are too many names, and I'm not going to have the time to explain who's who. So I hope that you guys are interested and go back to Google and look into who is involved in the whole story. My goal is to present a case study of what courts can do to protect democratic institutions when the institutional design of the judiciary allows them, and when they are willing also to do whatever they can to protect themselves as courts. So this is the story. In January of this year, Mark Zuckerberg, Meta's CEO, announced changes in his company's fact-checking policies. Zuckerberg says, and I quote here, he's planning to work with President-elect Donald Trump to oppose global censorship pressures. He makes claims about such pressures mounting in multiple regions, including Europe's ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship, his words, secret courts in Latin America that can order companies to quietly take things down, again, his words, and Chinese censorship. Of course, when I listened to the announcement, the first thing that I thought was secret courts in Latin America. Latin America has secret courts and I'm not knowing. So, of course, and also, of course, I knew he was talking about the Brazilian Supreme Court, or STF from now on. I will take some time to explain why Meta's CEO is concerned with the STF's orders and why this matters to all of us. So we go back to 2019. The STF decided to launch Inquiry 4781, known as the Fake News Inquiry, an investigation into the spread of, and I will quote also the official message from their website, false news, defamatory accusations, threats, and unauthorized use of published materials. According to the court, these actions may constitute crimes such as slander, defamation, and insult, particularly when directed at Supreme Court justices and their families. So, 2019, The Supreme Court started this inquiry based on the situation of widespread false news and defamatory accusations, threats against Supreme Court justices and their families. Again, the court started an investigation. I did not mention it incorrectly. I didn't mean police. I didn't mean prosecution. The court itself started the investigation. They were working with the police. Eventually, they work with the federal prosecutor, but the president of the court at the time, Dias Toffoli, explained that the court had the power to investigate crimes against its member and the institution. They were not provoked to do that. They started because they felt the need to do it. Soon, a political party with representation in Congress filed a constitutional claim asking the same court, the Supreme Court, if this inquiry was constitutional. The political party has the power, the capacity to start a constitutional claim. So they did that, and they questioned the court. Hey, do you think this is constitutional? You are the victim, you are the investigator, and you are the judge in the same case. But they argued that the court, of course, cannot be all of that in the same case. The inquiry is still open, though, meaning that the court decided that this is constitutional and they have the power to protect the institution. Now, the reality is that the court has established a precedent that gives them the investigative power, and they did not stop there. In 2021, they started a new inquiry that is known as the Digital Militia Inquiry to investigate Bolsonaro supporters allegedly involved in a coordinated criminal organization operating on digital platforms against democratic institutions. And those are not my words, those are the court's words. The same justice is behind this increase. Alexandre de Moraes, his name. He was nominated by a right-wing president, Temer, who became president after Dilma Rousseff's impeachment. Moraes was known for being tough on crime, and he had a political career before becoming a judge. He served in different positions in São Paulo's government, and he was Temer's justice minister. This is all to say that the left did not like him by the time of his appointment. So he was criticized as a name for the Supreme Court. In 2022, Alexandre de Moraes was nominated as the president of the Electoral Court. So if you're following me so far, 2019 and 2021, the court started an inquiry, and in both inquiries, the lead justice was Alexandre de Moraes. And he is still leading these cases. But in 2022, we have elections. And in Brazil, we have this Supreme Court, the Electoral Court, that is also a superior court. And the Electoral Court is led by the presidents are from the Supreme Court, the STF. So that year specifically, Alexandre de Moraes was nominated as the president of the Electoral Court. They have a rotation system, and honestly, it was just a big coincidence. But in that year, he had the responsibility of managing and protecting the presidential election. Not any election, Bolsonaro's re-election bid against the now free from jail Lula da Silva. If you don't know this story, you have to read it. It's another really interesting story in Brazilian politics. Lula is the current president. He won 2022, the 2022 election, but before, a little bit before 2022, he was in jail, involved in a corruption scandal that, uh, long story short, basically the Supreme Court understood that the leading judge in the case was biased. So the whole case was rejected and Lula was free. And I'm not going to remember exactly the year now. I believe a little bit before the 2022 election. However, this changed the political scenario. Lula is really, it's a liked personality. He's a character, and a lot of people, especially poor people, minorities, they support Lula. They tend to support Lula more than the higher classes of the society. Bolsonaro had the power of incumbency at the time in 2022, and yes, he used it as much as he could. The STF's investigation found out that his supporters, through an intricate net of extreme right masterminds, if I can call it like that, sponsors, and regular citizens, fans of Bolsonaro, they were all behind what they call a digital militia to undermine the election and create the necessary chaos that would eventually force the military to intervene and take down the regime. This plan was they were investigating this plan since 2021. They didn't know much at the time, but just recently the plan was completely uncovered and included also killing Alexandre de Moraes, killing Lula da Silva and the vice president as well. To stop the militia that included social media influencers, Moraes ordered social media platforms to take down their profiles. And I'm talking about YouTube, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, X, Telegram. Telegram is a Chinese social media platform. Some of them complied with the order and actually took down profiles of big influencers, but some resisted, like Telegram. They did not have an office in Brazil, so they could not be subpoenaed. And it took some time for the Brazilian court to try to actually get to subpoena the Telegram. Now we are in 2024, and the scenario is different. It's election year in the US, and for some reason, Elon Musk decides to fight back the Brazilian Supreme Court on X. In my opinion, he wanted to send a message to the world. Do not mess with us. We are strong enough to even take down or to interfere with institutions in democratic countries. The timeline goes this way. So in April 6, 2024, Elon Musk criticized Moraes on X and states that he would not comply with court rulings. April 8, 2024, again, Moraes includes Musk in the digital militias inquiry. In August, X and Musk announced the closure of the platform's office in Brazil, though the service remains operational. Moraes gives X 24 hours to appoint a new legal representative in Brazil. Moraes orders then the suspension of X until it complies with the Supreme Court orders. And again, he was not complying with any of those orders. And finally, by the end of the month, X begins to go offline in Brazil, the whole Brazil. You may think that this was too much. The justice, and the court actually, they were together in this decision. And you may think that the court should not go this far or they shouldn't interfere with an American company. However, I have to remember that Brazil is a sovereign country with a strong legal system, a democratic country, and any company that wants to operate in Brazil or in any other country, actually, must comply with the domestic laws. So, X, if they want to operate in any country, they must comply with domestic laws. And that's just one example. The legal question here is, should freedom of speech be protected at all costs, or should we impose limits to it? The STF has an answer. The Brazilian Supreme Court has an answer. The court is legitimate arbiter of the scope of freedom of expression, and they understand that the Constitution does not protect crimes related to the abuse of freedom of expression, such as hate crime, slander, and defamation, incitement of violence, and now the spread of false information. And I do not think that the court is only concerned with digital platforms. Actually, they are not just concerned with digital platforms. Their decisions included book releases, also the work of the press, although in 2009, the court struck down a law enacted during the military dictatorship to regulate press activities, declaring unconstitutional any sort of legislative intervention over press freedom. In this case, they protected press freedom, which is often targeted by extremists. So, who has the power to limit freedom of expression, freedom of the press? The court has the power. And here's my 2 cents on this case. I understand the rhetoric used by Musk and Zuckerberg, and others, of course. I believe that it's based on the idea of a shared reality. If members of a society have access to a marketplace of ideas, they will share a common understanding of facts, events, and basic truths. Consequently, we will have a meaningful public debate. However, there are two main problems with this idea, again, on my opinion. Social media platforms are not an open public space. Not everyone has access to it. They are private companies with private objectives. The content produced on such platforms is a product that they will transform into assets. They will sell the content that we all produce in it. Again, not everyone has access to social media platforms, and those who have access are not exposed to all the ideas. Their voices are not shared in the same way too. I do not need to explain how the algorithm works, but companies can help spread a certain idea and limit another one. And that defeats the whole purpose of a marketplace of ideas. Finally, we should pay attention to this war against social media or AI regulation. Some commentators left. For example, I was listening to a certain podcast. I'm not going to cite here, but the commentators were laughing at J.D. Vance's speech in Munich last week. But he was not creating a diversion, in my opinion. He was not making himself look bad in front of European countries. He was working on the project of controlling how people get informed and, of course, controlling how people think and finally, how people will vote at the end. On the other hand, I do not think that having a justice with so much power like Alexandre Moraes is healthy for a young democracy, especially like Brazil. In 2026, next presidential election year in Brazil, the president of the electoral court will be a justice that was nominated by Bolsonaro. Will he use the same precedents to protect whoever runs for these extreme rights? Bolsonaro lost his political power, so I'm betting that he's not going to be candidate. Will the court back his decisions? The next electoral court president, I mean. So far, the Brazilian court is working together with one common goal. The STF wants to protect the court, the judiciary. They want to protect themselves as well, the individuals. But what if they are not the target anymore? If extremists are satisfied with their position in this game, they will be left alone, I believe. And in this case, will the Supreme Court protect democracy as they are saying they are, if necessary, using all means that all ways, all tools that they have? So I'm not sure if they're going to actually protect democracy, if they are using this argument to actually protect themselves, protect the institution and the individuals. And I am concerned with the precedents that were raised in Brazil, especially with how much power the individual justice gained in this process. Because if it's not Alexandre de Moraes anymore in such a role, in this specific role, if it's a justice that is more aligned to the extreme right or eventually an extreme left candidate. So I believe that in this process, yes, the Brazilian Supreme Court helped to avoid a coup d'etat. That actually, we know now that there was a plan for a coup d'etat. The Brazilian Supreme Court was able to stop that. However, in the process, they gained so much power that we now see an imbalance between the branches of power in Brazil, and that may be difficult to deal in the future, to say the least. So right now, I only have questions. This scenario. I hope you guys have answers. So I am open for the debate now.
Okay, and just to remind the audience, if you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat and then I'll read them out. I have two questions. It looks like they're both through direct message. So the first question in a nutshell is just asking you to elaborate more on the criminal justice system in Brazil. You've already kind of talked about some stuff, but yeah.
Yes. So we have the Supreme Court. They are able to review constitutional cases. They have the final say on constitutional questions, basically constitutional review through the appeal system. A lot like the US, they were inspired by the appeal system of the US, but they also work as a constitutional court, actually, in which you can directly ask them. It's not open for anyone. Only a few entities have the power to directly ask the Supreme Court to review a certain law or a certain unconstitutional framework, even if it's not a law specifically. For example, the situation of violence in favelas is right now being reviewed by the Supreme Court because they have this power to enforce the Constitution and the principles of the Constitution. Under the Supreme Court, we have not exactly under, it's almost like on the side of the Supreme Court, we have the courts that are specialized in a certain area, like the electoral court, the superior electoral court, the labor court, military court. And we have one specific court that will only review legal cases, raising the question, is this claim here legal before a certain law? And they have the final say on legality. Then we have the state system, state court system, and the federal court system, which they are all lower level courts. It's super simplified, but this is the picture of the judiciary in Brazil.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So that will actually help us transition to the next private question I've gotten here. So a little bit long here, but let me read this. Could you tell us more about how it works when a court initiated an investigation itself? Who are the people it sends out to gather evidence, and who appears in hearings on both sides of the issue? Could you also say more about whether there is any precedent at all for a court-initiated investigation like this? Yeah, it's a really good question.
Mm-hmm. Precedent on that, I really, I'm not sure, but I want to know more, because all of that is started between 2018, 2019. Those are the precedents actually that I cited. So 2018, 2019 were the main precedents. They created this idea that the courts could defend themselves and they didn't have to wait for provocation to someone to ask them if they could answer a certain question, or if they could give the citizens a decision on a certain reality. So as far as how it works, so basically the president of the Supreme Court at the time, Toffoli, as I mentioned, he started the inquiry. And they defined the rapporteur, the person that the leading judge in the case, Alexandre de Moraes. And Alexandre de Moraes uses the federal police. I believe that would be like FBI. Oh, I'm trying to compare with the American system, but he uses the federal police to investigate. So he gives orders to the federal police to investigate on a big influencer, and they will bring all the evidence they need on that specific influencer. So they call the influencer to talk. Of course, the influencer will be there with his attorney or her attorney. And on the other side, they are going to have the prosecutors of the federal prosecutor. So the prosecutor's office works with the STF and the federal police. They are all working together to investigate, to produce evidence, and to decide on the case. The thing is, the inquiry is still open, so we don't have a judicial case yet. And that's one of the main mistakes, in my opinion, because it's taken too long for them to close the inquiry and start the judicial case. But so far, they're still investigating, creating more evidence.
Our next question here is from Renee. So she asks, do you think the courts are acting altruistically to stop the spread of inaccurate news, or are there other motives?
That's difficult to answer, but I believe there is there's ego involved, power, politics, of course. The personality of the person in leading this case, and I mean Alexandre de Moraes, is a personality that tends to be in front of the cameras, he was a politician before that. He was involved with politics at least. So I think there is also ego involved, why he wants to be in leading this case, and for so long as well, why he wants to have control of this. Maybe the goal at the end, he actually believes that the goal at the end is bigger than himself, is bigger than anything. But I cannot answer for him. I know that yes, he helped to hold democracy together, but at what cost? I don't know.
That's a tough question.
Mhm.
So our next one is from Nina Santiago. She writes, "Hi, Tassiana. Could you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what the response has been like from other countries in Latin America in the wake of this case? What kind of impact does this have outside of Brazil? Brazil's expectations from courts' relationships to media corporations."
Hi, Nina. Good to see you. Um, well, courts depends on the alignment with the president in power at the time. So right now in Latin America, we have Milei as the strong voice of the extreme right. So he's vocal against this process, against Alexandre de Moraes. He is taking the case, well, he's putting himself in a position of representing the extreme right in Latin America. So um, he's actually taking this case seriously and talking to different influencers of the United States, Elon Musk himself, trying to be the person that is there to protect the freedom of speech, to protect the interests of their group. Um, Countries like Uruguay, of course, Uruguay, Chile, Costa Rica, they will tend to respect institutions because they are democratic countries and they are really strong democracies in the region. Others, again, they're going to flip depending on the president in power. And because it's been so long, we've had some changes. He went from Bolsonaro to Lula in Brazil. So depends on the alignment of the country at the time.
Okay, so while we wait for some more questions to come in, I have a question. I'm
Okay.
curious about the arguments made by the sort of like Bolsonaro-aligned right against the validity and legitimacy of the investigation. If there, I'm sure there are arguments against it on the right there.
The main argument is that the court does not have the power to create an inquiry. And as victim, and again, I well, I do not I cannot say that I agree with them, but I tend to agree with them in that. I think it's too much. The court is the victim, is the investigator, and will be the judge eventually of the case. So yeah, it is too much to wrap your hand around it. But it is interesting that they are raising this question, of course, but they also say that the left is behind it, that they have ultimate goal. Um, they will use the freedom of speech argument as well. The same thing. The extreme right in Brazil, in Argentina, in Europe, in the US, they are an alliance and they have the same kind of rhetoric all over. So they in Brazil they force this understanding, the American understanding of freedom of speech, although Brazil has a specific legal system already explaining the limits of freedom of speech clearly to its citizens.
Oh, thanks.
Mhm.
Um, so looks like we have a question from Dr. Novkov. Oh, she writes, maybe more of an observation, but it seems that the large social media companies in the US are trying to expand the scope of American-style free speech arguments in ways that could damage other democracies. in effect forgetting that immediately after January 6th, the same companies recognize that some kinds of arguments need to be deplatformed. Do you see national judicial responses pushing back as the best way to challenge this? Or is it more of a problem for the international order?
That is definitely a problem of international order. I think it also. Uh, if I have to say, I'm really concerned with this. I mentioned that in the speech. I'm concerned with the lack of regulation of not only social media platforms but also AI. And why are those companies so interested in stopping regulation around the globe? Or, as you mentioned, Julie, they are interested in expanding the scope of American style free speech arguments, even though they don't use exactly the correct argument, but they are expanding this idea that freedom of speech should not be limited, that people must have the access to all of it ideas, that it's a individual right, and etc. What is the ultimate goal with that? Is it to just lead all the countries? The extreme right wants to expand uh, and create presidencies and lead all countries in the world? I don't know. Again, I have more questions. I share the same questions that you raised here. I don't think the national judicial responses will always answer to this. Depends also on institutional design of the countries that have stronger courts. Probably they will have a better answer. But I think that it should come from the Congress, should come from the international organizations and the states together to come up with a common regulation, if I can call it like that, a common regulation, common term on how we are going to deal with the expansion of these social platforms in our lives, in day-to-day lives.
I'm just pulling up the chat here. Doesn't look like there are questions. I'm curious about how misinformation and disinformation are defined in the court system there. Are there any like constitutional definitions at this point or doctrinal definitions, like how we know when there is misinformation or disinformation? Or is it like left up to the individual discretion of like this or that judge? Is it like a kind of I know it when I see it situation?
Mhm.
Yeah, what's the framework in Brazil?
There is no law regulating specifically,
Oh,
no constitutional regulation, meaning it's not in the Constitution. I think one important note here is that the Constitution of Brazil is extremely large. They have 250 articles, and they include everything that you can imagine. So from human rights, freedom of speech to, I don't know, how much the minimum salary should be. So everything is in there. So you can always create a constitutional argument, a constitutional claim, because eventually it's going to touch one of the articles of the Constitution. But there's no law specifically. Right now, Congress is debating, but we have now a conservative Congress, and they are leaning into expanding the rights of the social media platforms and making it easier actually for social media platforms. As far as for the differences between misinformation and disinformation, the decisions tend to understand disinformation as unintended information that is false, that you are actually creating false information because you want to achieve a certain goal. And misinformation, you lead the reader to wrong opinion or wrong understanding of that information. So it's not clear that it is false news, for example, but you're leading the reader to a certain side that you want.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So let's see. Our next question here again is it's from Renee. So she asks, is there a way to balance freedom of speech against stopping the spread of blatantly false news slash misinformation? It seems like we can't even agree on facts versus fiction anymore, and this is a very problematic for a variety of reasons.
The solution that not only Brazil, but other countries actually found is that if the spread of false information is a crime in your country, freedom of speech, basically you're abusing your freedom of speech and committing a crime. So the limit is the abuse. When you are committing a crime, you're abusing your right. So spreading false information is a crime or not? That's another question. Is it legal to spread false information? Is it protected by the legal system or falls in a gray area? And that's the issue in many countries because it falls in a gray area. It's going to be case by case, depending on the consequences of the spread of misinformation or disinformation. And one of the solutions that the Supreme Court of Brazil found was that the disinformation is leading to slander or defamation, or is leading to a threat. So if they're leading to an actual crime, they are going to limit the freedom of speech.
Our next question is from Twambo Chungo. They ask, given that there was a recent pushback of Elon Musk's X platform in Brazil with threats of a shutdown, how frequently do you think this type of response will become across Latin America? This is also in the context of Facebook removing an essential component, i.e. fact checking.
Yeah, so I started with that exactly, with the decision of Facebook, of Meta, removing the fact checking. And this actually does not involve Brazil. So they are removing fact checking, but Brazil will continue fact checking the social media platform. That's a decision of the country. And not only the court threatened the shutdown, but they went with the shutdown. The platform was off for the whole country. I don't know how frequently this type of response will be coming because one depends on the structure, the court of the country of Latin America. So if the structure allows the court to do that, and depends on the will of the justice or the will of the court to go with that. So we cannot really control the will of the justices or say at the end they are going to want to do that. I cannot say that. Depends a lot on the will of the individual, on the will of the court. Do they want to go through that? And by the way, Alexandre de Moraes spent days thinking if he would shut down X or not. He put himself in a situation because he announced it on us that he would shut down if X didn't comply with the order. After announcing, if he steps back, the court would be seen as weak. So he had to go with the shutdown because he couldn't put the court in the situation at the end.
Okay. Last call for any questions here. Let's see. I'm looking at the participants right now. No one has their hand raised. If we don't have any more questions, we can end it here. Let's just see. Thank you so much, Dr. Moura de Oliveira, and thank you to everybody who participated today, asked questions, generated discussion. We really appreciate it. Let's see, okay, yeah. Our next meeting at the Rockefeller College Lunch and Learn series is going to be March 31st. We're gonna have Ashley Fox come back again and talk about healthcare policy under Trump 2.0. But once again, thank you so much, everyone who participated today. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions.